I'm going to be recording a lecture here to introduce the week. And I think I'm probably going to do this through the rest of the summer, but we'll see how this one goes and how people respond to it. I have been using the same lectures for this class for a couple of years that I recorded back when we were in a pandemic. So I need to update some of them. This is one of my first attempts to try to do that. So for this week, we are talking about knowledge, being, and academic integrity. And the idea of this is to start to introduce a particular theme within philosophy and the tradition of philosophy, and to get you to do some reading on it and thinking about it and talking about it. What the image that you see here in your screen of Grover looking in the mirror comes from the classic story. What? Oh my gosh! I just lost Monster in the Mirror. Sorry, I lost the title of the story. At where Grover looks in the mirror and sees himself and recognizes that there is something about him he didn't know. And this leads us this story, but also this sense of seeing yourself in a new light or recognizing something in yourself that you didn't know, leads us to a philosophical question. How do I know I'm real? How do I know you are real? What do we do when others do not see us as real? Or what does it mean to be real in the year 2024? Now, these may seem like silly questions, and maybe they're just questions that philosophy majors ask while they're sitting in a salon drinking brandy. I don't know if that happens. Uh, but they are kind of essential questions to the problem of philosophy, not because necessarily we really question our own reality, uh, but because as a philosopher, you have to be able to maintain, to establish and prove truth. And we can't just take anything for granted. So one of the questions we must ask then is, how do we know this is real? How do you know that you're hearing my voice? How do you know that the breakfast that you ate this morning mattered? The very basic tenets of reality is where philosophy goes. This leads us to one of the traditional areas of philosophy. If you look at philosophy, it's got these big traditional areas that we study, and one of them is epistemology. And that's the question of, how do we know? How do we know we know? Which gets a little bit meta and weird. How do you know? How do we know? What does that mean? How do we get information into our brains and we know something for real? And then how do we know that we know that? How do we know it's not just some kind of facade or play, or how do we know we're not dreaming, as you'll see in one of our videos this week? What does it mean if we can know? If we can establish the idea that we can know something, that there's a brain here that functions, what does it mean? Why is that important? And maybe this gets expanded to, how is knowing different than feeling, emotions? How is knowing different than beliefs and what we truly believe to be true? Or how is knowing different than just our sensual experiences of the world? Each of these might be a type of knowing, but this full of philosophical sense of, I know this, I can establish this as truth. That's where epistemology goes. Epistemology is hard. Epistemological arguments are harder. It's even harder to say epistemological. The idea of epistemology is the ways that we can establish truth about what we know or what we can know, the established truth about human experience as being something real. When we say something like, God told me to do this, that can't really be established philosophically. But if we say something like, the purpose of humanity is to learn, that's an epistemological statement. It is a statement about the truth of who we are. Now, you may argue with me, right? You may say, well, no, God told me to do this. That is a truth that we can prove. But that moves it into a different area of philosophy. what we want to talk about with epistemology is what can we establish as truth, and how do we prove that through philosophical argument. So this week, in this hard area of philosophy, we're going to be looking at some hard things to read and watch. One of them is an argument of what the skeptics asked and how they asked. And this is ancient Greek skeptics. I'm missing a word on my PowerPoint. I don't know how that happened. But ancient Greek skeptics questioned everything. They wanted to know, how can we justify anything as true? How do we know what dirt is? How do we know what air is? The skeptics were about asking the question how and why. Descartes comes along a few hundred years after, a number of 100 years after the skeptics, and he wants to try to prove the existence of God, which is, of course, something that epistemology finds very difficult to do. But in trying to prove the existence of God, he kind of nails down one of the primary epistemological arguments that has been made in the history of philosophy. That argument is, I think things, so I am real. Because somebody who is not real cannot think things, or a thing that is not real cannot think. So Descartes comes up with this epistemological argument, traditionally known as I think, therefore I am. And we're going to read part of that this week. We're also going to read about John Locke's idea of identity and diversity. And let's not miss what he's saying. He's not doing the diversity, equity, and inclusion argument that we do today. He's doing a different kind of diversity, which is, how do you know that the person you were when you were 4 is the same person you are when you're 44? What is the link between those two people? Are they the same? It's a question of how your identity shifts in different experiences, in different contexts, in different times. I'm going to try to say the next name. Sarva Priyananda. I messed it up. I'm sorry. But this is a Swami, a religious leader out of New York. And you're going to be watching a lecture of his on the nature of consciousness in the Hindi philosophical belief system. And it tries to establish how our consciousness is different than our thinking mind. And tries to show us how those two things function. We're also going to read Ansel Dua's argument about the mestiza and the mestiza nature, to talk about how our identity forms and how our identity is a part of who we are. And then finally, we're going to end with Abigail Thorne's argument about the transforming self. It's a lot of hard text this week, as there are going to be much of the weeks. We've already talked about the 7-week semester and needing to cram all this in. I've tried to cut down. This is actually a cut down on the reading from what I was doing last year. I'm trying to focus us a little bit more just to make sure we get the basic concepts. And I think these are some fundamental concepts that we need to understand about epistemology. What I want you to make sure you're doing is reading this and reading it carefully. And I'll say along these lines, because the epistemology is hard, you don't want your academic practices to make it harder by just trying to skim through it or just trying to pretend like you've read it. And I'm saying that because it's 9 p.m. Your journals for week 1 are due in just a couple hours. And just like 30 minutes ago, I got an email from somebody saying, wait, we've got to write a journal. What do I read? If you're not following along with what's going on in the class, you're running into problems for yourself in the class. So make sure you are recognizing this stuff is hard and it takes time. You cannot do it on Monday at 8:30 p.m. when your journal is due at 11:59 p.m. But one of the values of it, one of the benefits of this is that it's hard, but it's really fascinating, and it can really make your mind richer with ideas. Let's just think about what the value of epistemology might be today. I mean, we live in a world where we build an identity for social media, or identities, depending on the social media we're on. We live in a world where news seems to be fake, or we can't always trust news, where we look at a message board or a social media feed and it's filled with anonymous trolls who are just trying to disrupt conversations. We live in a world of deep fakes where people can take technology and change people's faces and experiences just through the technology. We live in a world of catfishing where people pretend to be somebody that they're not in order to get some kind of benefit, where the opinion is often replayed as news rather than as fact, where people claim to be authority without having any kind of authority whatsoever. They try to make interpretations about the mental capacity of a president or about the innocence or guilt of another president. People are claiming authority all over the place. We live in a world of avatars where people pose to be different kinds of people and different kinds of with different kinds of experiences. We live in a world where we have to construct our profiles, where we have to think about what image we use, what words we use, how much information we give out. We live in a world where we are targeted by ads as we get profiled by the social media we use, and because of the tracking, we get tracked everywhere we go. And we live in a world where we don't see all the truth, even though we pretend like the internet gives us all the truth. It's edited for us. We don't get to see everything, and it really depends on the ways that we've built our algorithms. Algorithms should probably be a word on here. And we live in a world of AI, 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 and AI. And this world is having an effect on what we know, what we think we know, how we know. It is fundamentally changing some of those ideas of knowledge. And along those lines, I'll go back for a moment to the idea of academic skills. It is changing some of the fundamental ways we produce knowledge. And as a professor who started in one era, a pre-internet era, and is ending a career, hopefully not for another 20 years, but in a world that will be very different, I am kind of seeing a change in the ways that we learn knowledge, ways we appreciate knowledge, the ways that we practice knowledge. As a student, I think you should be very thoughtful about how you're engaging with knowledge. What is meaningful for you? What is meaningful in the ways that knowledge is being built in the world? And how is your social condition, the world that you exist in, being changed by our current world's relationship with epistemology? That means that you should be thinking about, why are you doing a reading journal? Why are you taking a class? Why are you doing the reading? And what methods do you use to be true to the type of world that you want to have, the type of knowledge that you want to have? Ultimately, looking at epistemology has a philosophical tradition that we've got to get to. You're going to be reading some big name philosophers this week, but it also is really useful for you as a person, because we all have to deal with our epistemological selves. Who were you just 4 years ago in 2020? And there, that was another historical moment that affected what epistemology meant. Who were you in 2020? Who are you now? Who will you be in 2 years? How will who you are now be shifted through time and environment in 2 years? Who are you going to be in 20 years? In the year 2044? I'll probably be retiring by then. Who are you going to be at that point? And how will your understanding of knowledge, of yourself, of your identity shift according to the world that you exist in? The ultimate question here, and this is one that John Locke will definitely help us answer, but I think all the other writers here are going to make us think about it as well. Are you you? Your readings this week are partially online, partially in our textbook. You need to keep on making sure you're keeping focused here, getting the readings done, getting the discussion boards done, watching the lectures. There will be another lecture posted. I won't get it posted until probably Friday, maybe Thursday. But you're going to have another lecture for this week that's going to talk about some of the bigger ideas that our writers are giving us. I hope you're having a great week. I hope you're enjoying the class. Please be in contact with me if you have any questions so that we can make sure everything is going straightforward for you and so that you can know what you know. Talk to you later.